Oftentimes, we like to colloquially separate between political and non-political events, actions, and content. When we watch the news, we recognize that the happenings are political, but we might often turn off the television and believe that we are now separated from those political happenings. We don't generally understand our lives as being fundamentally products of political maneuverings, and we don't generally like to understand that our desires and thoughts can often be as much the foundation of political change as the dealings of public officials. It is this perception of abstractness that lends some of the most dangerous political messaging in art an air of nonpartisanship, even when produced by one of the most infamously controlling political systems known to our modern world. Four Steps in the Clouds is a film about a man who agrees to pose as the father of a young woman's baby after incidentally meeting her during a business commute. Along the way, the two grow to have an understated care and appreciation for each other as they travel throughout the Italian countryside. But in the end, the sham comes clean to the family patriarch, and the protagonist returns home to his wife and children. Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion is a film about the chief inspector of a police precinct, who murders a woman he is having an affair with and spends the film alternately covering his tracks and trying desperately to be caught. Despite his best and worst efforts, in the end, though he confesses, his confession falls onto deaf ears, and he is deemed unfalsifiably above suspicion. On the surface, these might seem to be separate characters with separate struggles, one actively grappling with ideology, the other not. However, looking closer, we might understand these two characters to share the same fundamental struggle, being at odds with the central dialectic of fascist power and emasculated both by their lovers and by society at large. The inspector's struggle to prove his mistress wrong when she berates him, calls him a child, and leaves him for a socialist, echoes a central sense of emasculation in the face of power. She dares him to murder her in a flashback, pointing out that his power would make him essentially impossible to convict. His response then shows her that his power is ultimately unrealized through his subservience to the state. The inspector is at once the most powerful man in the city, capable of doing whatever he wants without consequence, and fundamentally incapable of being any more free than the first gear in a long line of gears, essentially forced to spin in sequence alongside every other gear. He can murder his mistress, but he cannot force the machine to create an output that it was not designed to create. What is Paolo Bianchi, the protagonist of Four Steps in the Clouds, but the foundation of this fascistic mania? Where the inspector has all the power, Paolo has none. Paolo is subservient to the needs of his wife, his family, and the needs of the woman he meets on the train, Maria. His wife is portrayed as nagging and controlling, and he is fundamentally joyless, forced to warm the milk for his family in the morning and wake his children. Unthinkable burdens, you understand. Whereas when he escapes to life in the country, he stumbles upon a family in which the patriarch, Luca, is the most implicitly respected figure. Luca serves almost as the idyllic mirror to Paolo. He's the father of two children, a girl and a boy. He's waited upon by the women in his life, and when he speaks, his word is law within the family. Within the logic and framing of the film, the paradisical Italian country is made so by its subservience to patriarchal norms. However, the patriarch himself is still subservient to the rituals of good society. Paolo and Maria's scheme is to convince him to let her stay with the family despite her supposedly sullied honor at the hands of another man. In the end, though he chooses to let her stay after an impassioned speech by Paolo, the fact that he would have otherwise been forced to banish the daughter that he loves speaks to the paradoxical powerlessness of this supposedly powerful figure. The film's implicit messaging, the way that the life in the country is portrayed as idyllic and vibrant in comparison with Paolo's boring home life of subservience, would have that life would be better were men allowed to be the patriarch that Luca is. But what is Luca but the prototypical version of the fascist inspector? At once the occupant of the most powerful station within a societal unit, and also a powerless part of a machine whose cogs are designed to turn in one direction exclusively, creating one inexorable outcome in all cases. Four Steps Above the Cloud might be more subtle in its politics, but the idea that it is somehow blind to politics is to ignore the fact that film is ultimately a reflection of the world as seen by those creating that film. The ideologies of filmmakers will be reflected in who and what in their films is framed as good, and this seemingly descriptive framing can create in its audience the drive to take its implicit prescriptions as a blueprint for real-world prescriptions. In failing to recognize when an argument is made, we are necessarily surrendering the victory of the debate to that argument. And particularly in a modern age in which male sexual insecurity finds itself the root of a new fascistic movement, we might want to think twice about what we consider political. Because normalization of the aesthetic of fascism is ultimately a normalization of fascistic thinking. And if we fail to recognize the signs of fascistic thinking in our own time, place, and people until they wear it as openly as the chief inspector, then we're failing to recognize the smell of a gas leak in our homes before it explodes. Because remember, the Nazis' first plan was mass deportation.